When some wild-eyed 8-foot-tall maniac grabs your neck, taps the back of your favorite head up against the barroom wall, and he looks you crooked in the eye and he asks you if you paid your dues, you just stare that big sucker right back in the eye and you remember what old Jack Burton always says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir. The check is in the mail. Welcome to Explosive Enterprises, and today we're reviewing Kingdom Technology's take on the KG-9 or TEC-9. Despite the gun's eventual notoriety, it actually began as an earnest effort to market a military submachine gun. George Kellgren, an engineer at Swedish firm Interdynamic, designed the MP9 in the late 1970s as a modernized loose adaptation of the successful Carl Gustav M45 submachine gun. When Interdynamic failed to find a buyer, though, Kellgren redesigned it into an open-bolt semi-auto pistol named the KG-9 and marketed it to the U.S. civilian market under a new subsidiary called Interdynamic USA in 1981. After just a year of production, ATF mandated that its open-bolt design constituted a machine gun, so it was redesigned into the closed-bolt KG-99. Kellgren soon sold his stake into the company and went on to other things, while Interdynamic USA, renamed Intratec, renamed the KG-99 to TEC-9, and spent the next 20 years producing a succession of variants intended to evade various targeted and blanket legal bans on their products. Despite weak initial sales, the KG-99 or TEC-9 became popularized through Miami Vice, which depicted it as a submachine gun used by drug dealers and their gangs. Soon life imitated art, and while the closed-bolt variants that constituted the vast majority of production were much more difficult to convert to full auto than TV implied, they were still cheap, mean-looking 9mm pistols that came with 32-round magazines out of the box. Under Intratec, they were poorly made, and in semi-auto and stockless form, grossly oversized and unergonomic for what they were, but nonetheless became cemented in public consciousness as a gun for petty criminals and mass murderers. And frankly, that's a pretty accurate characterization. It was a bad gun used by bad people, and all of its lingering appeal comes from its representation in pop culture rather than anything intrinsic to the gun itself. People buy them out of nostalgia for Miami Vice, Big Trouble in Little China, Falling Down, Archer, or Grand Theft Auto, but otherwise this ungainly plastic we have submachine gun at home from the guy who founded Keltec has nothing going for it. Which leads to one of my favorite games, determining whether the flaws of the real thing carry over to the Airsoft copy. This is where I'd identify exactly what variant the Kingdom Technology version copied, but it isn't actually a clone of any real TEC-9 variant. In fact, the Kingdom Technology is, much like the Arms Revolution KG-9 about a decade ago, a modified clone of the old Marzen KG-9. While it incorporates some modern design changes internally, externally it's very close to the Marzen and inherits its inaccuracies, which we'll cover as we go. So let's start with the externals. The barrel is pot metal and is internally threaded for an included adapter that allows mounting of any 14mm negative threaded muzzle device, but lacks the external threading that the real guns have. The barrel passes through an upper receiver tube, which is the primary steel component of the gun. Despite being steel, it has the same painted black finish as the rest of the gun, which while accurate to some TEC-9s, does unfortunately give the appearance of a typical pot metal airsoft gun. This tube has 5 ventilation holes in each row, which brings us to the first major visual discrepancy. There never was a real TEC-9 variant like this. Real TEC-9 tubes are about a full inch shorter with 4 holes per row, with a shorter barrel to match. You might not have noticed, but your brain did. Well, regardless, the tube also features a welded-in sling loop on the left and a fixed-blade front sight. This is patterned off that of the closed-bolt KG-99 and early TEC-9, but made of plastic and held in place by a hex head screw rather than welded on like the real one. The charging handle is on the left side and is also pot metal. We actually repainted this, and I'll talk about why when we take the gun apart. For now, while this is an open-bolt gun, it lacks the safety cutout notch present on the real open-bolt KG-9s, but also the charging handle cannot be pushed in to lock it like on the closed-bolt KG-99 and TEC-9s. On the right side, the bolt is visible, and this is a shinier finish than the rest of the gun. The rear sight is the simple bent plate style used on post-1987 TEC-9s, so the front sight is patterned off an early gun, while the rear sight is patterned off a late gun. The rear sight assembly is held on by 2 Phillips head screws, again because like the front sight it's all plastic, where the real thing is a spot-welded steel plate, and like the front sight it is fixed in place and cannot be adjusted. The rear sling loop is welded in, and the whole upper tube is secured to the lower by a Phillips head screw on the rear, which again is not accurate to the real thing, which uses a screwless retention method. The lower receiver is nylon, and is basically one giant injection molded chunk of plastic. Parts are secured with steel pins, which is nice, and overall it's pretty close to the real thing and very solid. Oddly though, the pistol grip is elongated, noticeably thicker front to back than its real counterpart. While the lower shows all the markings, with Kingdom Taiwan markings on the magazine well, a serial number above the trigger, and Made in Taiwan on the right side, with a stylized KT badge on either side of the grip. These are bogus markings, of course, in the style of Intertech, but without matching the substance. The magazine release is a paddle, easy to actuate with a thumb, and the trigger is a simple pivoting lever. In front of the trigger, though, is a sliding selector switch. No TEC-9 or variant ever had this, being a purely Airsoft invention to select between safe, semi, and full auto by sliding right to left. The only select fire member of the TEC-9 family, the original MP9 prototype, had a toggle switch on the right side instead. While the gun weighs in at a very modest 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds on the dot, the magazine is surprisingly heavy at 615 grams or 1.35 pounds. This is a pot metal brick of a magazine holding a whopping 58 BBs with a pistol-style open front follower design and a basic flat black finish. So overall, when it comes to externals, the broad strokes are there, but when you look closely, you notice the Phillips head screws, the odd length, the Airsoft markings, the plastic sights, the toy-like selector. I can't even say that it passes the 15-foot test because when the magazine is fully loaded, the stack of BBs is quite visible from the front. This is a blast from the past, a replica of a replica from an era where it was normal that Airsoft guns wouldn't look quite right, let alone be authentic in terms of materials. But there's nothing really egregiously bad about the appearance, and it's nice that it comes with a steel tube even if the gun is still mostly pot metal and plastic. It misses the mark when it comes to looking like its real counterpart, but it's still obviously a TEC-9 family member of some sort, and it feels solid in the hand. Well, there's no field stripping a TEC-9, so on to disassembly. First, removing the front sight screw frees it, and then the front barrel collar can pull out the front. This is very tight out of the box, but has broken in a bit with repeated disassembly. Next, the screw at the rear can be removed, which frees the upper. And lastly, the charging handle must be removed. The way this should work is that you just unscrew it and then you're done. However, on this gun, the screw was thread-locked into the gun rather than into the charging handle, which we believe to be an assembly mistake. This started a comedy of errors that ultimately ended with the screw replaced and the charging handle in need of repainting to disguise finish wear imparted by a pair of pliers. Well, with that sorted out and the charging handle removed, the upper tube just pivots and comes off. The internals can now be freed by punching out 3 knurled body pins from right to left. And look at that, all the internals come out as a self-contained unit, leaving only the safety. So as you can see, rather than the bolt riding in the upper receiver tube and the trigger parts fitted to the lower receiver, everything is self-contained in a plastic trigger box that holds the bolt on integral rails. Before disassembling further, I can simply pull off the stop on empty lever and spring. Next, I punch out 3 pins from left to right this time, and that frees the solid metal end piece, recoil spring, and bolt assembly. Now it's just a bunch of screws holding the trigger box together, and these all come out the right side, but we find it easier to take the trigger pack apart by removing the left side. The hop unit now comes out, and the pot metal outer barrel slides right off. We'll come back to the trigger parts, but for now let's continue with the barrel assembly. On the hop chamber, we have the adjustment system. This is a fairly typical toothed adjustment collar, but it's mated to a simple wheel to make it adjustable without needing a special tool. We did have issues with this hop self-adjusting, so we roughed up the surface a bit, and that helps, although it does not completely solve the issue. The collar and wheel pull right off, and now the unit is just held together by 2 screws. Take those out, and we're down to the inner barrel. Now the inner barrel itself appears to be a standard GBB cut, but the bucking is interesting. It's exceptionally soft, 40D or maybe even less, with a cylindrical contact patch that the split hop adjustment arm acts directly on. More significantly, the bucking has a visible rib at the entrance that requires force to push the BB through, and this appears to be the gun's solution to the accuracy problem we've observed on prior open bolt guns, caused by spin incurred during feeding. Unfortunately, because of this arm design, other buckings don't play nicely in this hop unit, so we're staying with stock for now. Moving on to the bolt, we can take it apart by removing 2 screws, and that frees the nozzle assembly from the bolt itself. The bolt actually appears to be aluminum, not pot metal like most of the rest of the gun. The nozzle assembly has 2 aluminum wings to act as contact surfaces against the trigger box, align the nozzle and retain the nozzle return springs, and the nozzle itself finishes disassembly with 1 screw, revealing a standard hollow type rocket valve and spring. Overall, pretty straightforward, and when reassembled, it's just a nice, chunky, self-contained bolt, but fairly lightweight at 129 grams. In the fire control group, all the parts are pot metal. This has already proven to be an issue because I am a gorilla and... No, you know what? I'm not taking all the blame for this one. What happened was that the safety didn't quite align properly, so when I pulled the trigger, the edge of the original hook on the front of the trigger just barely caught the stop block on the safe position, and pulling the trigger applied enough stress to break it. We replaced the hook with a piece of steel rod taken from a coat hanger, and not only does it work again, the rounded surface fixes that misalignment problem. Anyways, back to the trigger pack itself. It's easiest to describe how this works with it reassembled, so I'll do that now. When reassembling, pivot the valve knocker transfer bar upwards, and then when installing the left side of the trigger pack, push up on the trigger spring to clear the trigger stud. So the way this works is that pulling the trigger depresses the main sear, which releases the bolt. As the trigger is pulled further, it slips off the front of the sear and releases it, which functions as a semi-auto disconnect. The bolt is released by the main sear and moves forwards under spring force, and at the very end of travel it pushes the valve knocker forwards, which permits the locker to drop down behind it. When the bolt starts to recoil, a protruding surface on the underside of the bolt trips a release lever to reset the valve knocker, and then the bolt is caught again by the main sear. The safety works by blocking the trigger from moving, and then full auto works by limiting the trigger travel so that it cannot go far enough to slip off the sear and reset. However, out of the box, it took an excessive amount of force to fire in full auto, and this was because the stop surface on the safety was just a bit too tall for the sear to release, and so it was actually relying on the inherent flex of the parts. We recommend slightly filing down the top of the full auto stop, which is a shorter stop block on the safety, until the bolt releases cleanly, and optionally slightly chamfering the sides of each block to prevent the minor misalignment issue I mentioned before. With the bolt reinstalled, we can examine exactly how it is retained. The trigger box has small rails, and these are sandwiched between the bolt and the nozzle guide plates. So it's aluminum on plastic contact, which, if appropriately greased, should minimize wear. When the gun is out of ammo, the follower on the magazine pushes up on the stop on empty lever in the internals, and then the bolt will hit it instead of going fully into battery. Simple, effective, and doesn't rely on the bolt hitting the follower, which is a nice improvement over the VFC MP5 and Northeast Uzi we previously reviewed. Lastly, the magazine takes down just 2 pins holding on the base plate, revealing a large empty internal reservoir that holds just under 30 grams of gas. At the top, the feed lips are molded into the top cap, which holds in the gas router, secured to the magazine with a single cross pin. The release valve is also pretty standard, so there's nothing really surprising going on with this magazine, though it is a little odd how the router essentially doesn't protrude above the cap. It holds a lot of BBs, it holds a lot of gas, it stops the gun when it's empty, it weighs a fair bit. Just note on reassembly that the base plate pins are different lengths. So while the internals are made of pot metal and plastic, the functional components are generally well designed and low stress. We're already seeing wear to the sears, but none of the surfaces appear to be high stress or reliant on critical geometry. It's possible that the main sear might wear enough to let the gun go runaway, as the sample allegedly did at MOA 2022, but given the amount of engagement we observed, we suspect Kingdom Technology beefed up the catch surface on the bolt as a result. That may be responsible for the full auto trigger pull issue we noted, and the safety design is probably the weakest point and ought to be tweaked. Other than that, though, I'm pleasantly surprised to see simple solutions to both the open bolt problem and stop on empty. On to manual of arms, and this is pretty simple. The gun fires from an open bolt, so it must be cocked in order to fire. The safety is a sliding design and goes safe semi-auto from right to left. The trigger is a long but not especially heavy pull that breaks at an indeterminate point and has a significant amount of overtravel. Unsurprisingly, this is not a great trigger, but even the best trigger would be almost irrelevant given that the bolt lurches forwards before it fires anyways. When the gun is out of ammo, the bolt only drops halfway, and then the magazine is removed with the thumb release. Insert a new mag and re-rack the charging handle, and it's ready to go. If hop-up adjustment is needed, it's a convenient wheel just inside the frame, scrolling up to reduce hop or down to increase. The mags themselves are easy to gas, and then easy to load by either loading straight down through the feed lips, or pulling down the follower just like typical pistol mags and squirting in BBs with a speed loader. Of course, this will tend to not properly stack the BBs. Well, let's go shoot. that's actually pretty nice. It's snappy, decently loud, and while the bolt is lightweight, the fact that it's cycling through the center of gravity gives it some discernible recoil, though nothing mind-blowing. It cycles quickly and without noticeable lock time from being open bolt, so it's pretty easy to shoot rapidly. For efficiency, at 1 round per second continuously at room temperature, it gasses out at 130 to 140 shots. In full auto, it does zippy bursts, having no trouble clearing a mag. And then almost making it through a second. But as it gets cold, it starts to struggle. When the mag is chilled to freezing, it just does not want to cycle at all. It's apparent that the nearly flush gas router design does not produce a perfect seal, compromising efficiency as it gets cold. You don't see any good way to fix this without risking potentially damaging contact between the nozzle and mag body. On the chrono, it starts at just over 1 joule and quickly settles down, but still occasionally spikes to just above 1 joule, so not the most consistent gun we've ever seen. Then at range, well, it's usable, though it seems to struggle to consistently hop 32s, so we have to tune it to slightly under hop. With this, it throws the occasional flyer, but otherwise is fairly consistent in application of hop. Firing offhand at 20 yards, we see a grouping of under 6 inches in either axis. Not amazing by any means, but that's only partly due to the gun's accuracy, because it's partly due to the inadequacy of the sights, which brings us to practicality. While it's pretty easy to shoot either like a normal pistol or in a push-pull stockless submachine gun stance, everything else about it is just kind of awkward. The sight picture is coarse, with the rear sight aperture wide enough for the entire front post, not just the blade. The sights are fixed and completely non-adjustable, so what you get is what you get, and this example consistently shoots right and low of point of aim. The manual of arms is typical for an open bolt subgun, with a straightforward and easy reload process. I also appreciate how easy it is to tweak the hop up, though that is a set and forget thing. As with the real open bolt, if it is carried with the bolt forward, if anything partially retracts the bolt and then releases, it will fire. So the safe way to carry with the mag inserted is locked open and set to safe, but then that allows ingress of dust or dirt. You want a holster for it? Good joke. While the overall package is manageable at a loaded weight of 1.6 kilograms or 3.5 pounds, in terms of bulk, this is clearly a small submachine gun masquerading as a pistol. You can put it on a sling, but the sling loops are too small for modern sling attachment hooks. As mentioned before, the magazines are quite hefty at over 600 grams, but since they do hold 58 BBs apiece, the ratio of ammo to magazine weight is better than most gas mags. Just 4 mags provides more ammo than a 6+1 combat load of AR mags, with more than enough gas capacity to get through them, so this might be a solid choice for a low-profile setup with minimal LBE. But where practicality is concerned, I think the real issue is that, just like with the real TEC-9, there's very little it does better than a normal handgun. The mag capacity is comparable, the recoil is comparable, it's just big and awkward and open bolt and has crappy sights. I think you could make a case for the TEC-9 by mounting a stock, taking it back to its compact submachine gun roots rather than an oversized pistol analog, and that brings us to upgrades and aftermarket. Since the original Interdynamic MP9 featured a distinctive foregrip and collapsible stock, it would be logical to... Sure, we could slap rails on it, why not? I love buying iconic guns just to turn them into pseudo-modernized crap. It's like carcinization by way of mall ninjas. Okay, petty complaining aside, while there's no current aftermarket for this product and no upgrades we strongly recommend, we do hope that some company takes it upon themselves to produce a wire collapsible stock. A replacement upper receiver and barrel that more closely match an actual KG-9 would be nice too, but I'm not holding my breath for any real aftermarket beyond rail adapters. This is a niche product by a small company and the market is understandably narrow. So let's conclude with pros and cons. This modified clone of the Maruzen inherits that gun's dimensional and detail inaccuracies when compared to the real thing, and while the externals are generally good with a nylon lower receiver and steel upper, the unrealistic elements are noticeable. Internally, it's mostly pot metal, but a solid design that incorporates some nice quality of life tweaks and simple solutions to common issues on open bolt guns, though out of the box it does have that full auto problem that must be addressed. Functionally, it works fairly well for an open bolt gun, though accuracy is not spectacular and cold weather performance is poor, and while the mags are rather heavy, they do offer a substantial BB capacity and more than enough gas to clear it. And ergonomically, well, it's a TEC-9 with all the problems that entails. This gun is a straight upgrade over the original Maruzen, but the industry has moved on since then, and by modern standards, it's just okay. It's fine. I'm thoroughly whelmed. Which brings us to price. At around $320 for the gun itself and $40 to $50 per magazine, this is typically priced for a gas blowback submachine gun. It's comparable in price to a KWA M11 with steel body kit, but only about $100 cheaper than a Northeast Uzi. Unlike both of these, however, the TEC-9 does not require major tweaking out of the box, with only the safety needing 5 minutes of adjustment, and while the overall performance is not spectacular, it does work. So a collector who expects realism and authenticity to the original will be disappointed, as will an airsofter who's looking for maximum performance, but in the niche of gangster gats, this represents a decent value, provided you can handle the quirks of it being a TEC-9. Well, that's all for today, and yes, we will be following up on our GBB 101 videos soon. As always, thanks for watching.